Okay, so today we're going to put in RaceTech Gold Valves and shims for desert riding, hard desert riding with for the XR650R. First step is going to be to take off the forks. It's a good idea to just open up all the clickers because when you put in your new valve and shim set, you're going to reset them to a certain point, so you might as well loosen them now. Okay, it's time to remove the fork oil and take out the compression stack from the bottom of the fork. And you come to the bottom here with a 14 millimeter impact socket. You get your impact wrench and you go to town. This is the first time I've done it myself, so let's see how it goes. You got to push in because the force of the spring is helping you loosen this thing. Easy peasy. Hey, there it is. Compression stack is out. And of course I spilled oil all over the floor. Of course I did. Right, after doing a bit of cleanup, turn the fork vertical right side up in the vise and let it drain out completely. We're going to be changing the oil at some point. Okay, we've got the RaceTech Gold Valve for the XR650R. Number is 2530. Comes with these bits and bobs and your shims and a bunch of little stickers and a couple of gigantic ones too. Right, so the first thing you do is you use these QR codes and you punch in a bunch of data about your riding style and it'll kick back the shim stack you need. I've already done that, so I'm going to lay out my shims. They are all 0.1 millimeter thick. I measured them all the other day, so I know that I don't have to measure their width. I'm just going to measure their diameter and with a caliper, and I'm going to lay them all out. My particular setup calls for 11.1 by 21 millimeter shims, followed by a reverse pyramid going down from 20, 19, 18, 17, 16, 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, and 10. And that's what we're going to put in. This is for an 80 kg guy with a big tank doing aggressive but not pro riding in the desert. I put the shim stacks onto a couple of sets of old valves we got laying around so that I don't knock them all over the place. And I think I will latch them in place with a piece of foam like this. Yeah. Now, they can wait for installation. Okay, the plan now is to put our compression stack, the one that we've removed, into the vise, again with the aluminum grabbers, and remove this nut. If the fork has never been removed before, the top of this is going to have peening on it from the factory that you're going to have to file down carefully with a file and then clean up nicely to remove that nut. It's very important that you clean it nicely because when you remove all the shims or when you put new shims on, it snags on that, on any little uneven surfaces and can cause damage. So that's what you're going to have to do. But this one has already been opened before, so it's just got Loctite on it and no peening. So I'm just going to remove it. I believe that's a 10 millimeter. Nope, it's a 12. Okay, now I've got this loose. I'm going to remove the nut off the top carefully, and I'm going to start setting everything down in order that it comes off. So it goes the nut, and then there's this sleeve, a tiny, tiny fragile little spring, which goes over the top of this little collar. which nests inside this spacer washer. And then we're to the valve. This is an original valve. And now comes the shim stack. Right, so there's all the bits and bobs pulled out of off of the compression stack tower. It is now naked. These are the shims that came out. Now this was set up, this is the Bruce Borinak's desert racing setup. There's no point looking at it and comparing it with what we're about to put in, because we're also going to change the valve. So there's no sense talking about how they compare. At least I don't know how to talk about it. But you can see that there's fewer of these larger shims. It still goes down to a little pyramid spot, and then there's an end. So this has less shims, but again, I don't think there's any point comparing. So out of this, what we're going to keep are these pieces. We're going to put a new valve in. We're going to put all new shims in, and we're going to keep at the bottom these two washers that go at the very, very bottom. This is the gold valve itself, and I'm going to take one of these O-rings out and put it on where it belongs there, and then I'm going to set it all out so you can see the difference. Got my O-ring in. This is the way it goes. These bits are coming with me. We're going to replace with the gold valve. These are 11 of those 21 millimeter shims. Then it goes 20 down to 10. And we're going to add these two guys at the very end. And that lines up with what we've got here. They give you instructions for how to put it all together. All right, I've got all the shims on. They're in a little upside down pyramid on the stack there. Focus! Focus! Anyway. And now I'll put on the valve. This side up. That guy. Here's what you got to be careful about. When you put the valve on, make sure it's the correct way up. Then you've got this ring, and this collar sits inside that ring. It's important that it sits there. And the spring goes around the collar. It's important that it goes around and doesn't get bound up and crimped anywhere. Then you tighten the nut. Okay, a couple of little points here. I've tightened this on. I actually used the nut that comes with the kit from RaceTech. It's a little bit lower profile, but it's also a 13. Anyway, everything's moving in. The check valve is loose and moving around. The shims are in place. I didn't crunch anything. I'm ready to install it again. Okay, in addition to what RaceTech sends you about your shim stack and oil level and things like that, they also talk about putting in a spacer to preload the spring a bit. They suggested 6 millimeters. I'm going to do 10, and I'm going to cut it out of this piece of steel tube, and it's always a pain in the ass. The first one was almost straight enough to make Alan Milliard proud, but this one, oh God! Time to hit the grinder. After a little bit of filing and with some work on the grinder, I'm happy with those 10 millimeters. We've taken the valve and we've finger tight and screwed it in, and we're gonna prop it back in. Because you haven't removed the cap on the top yet, the spring is pushing down nice and hard. You might have to reach up and grab the stanchion and pull down a bit to get some pressure, but it'll go in nicely. No, and there it is.
You have to press the spring down.
All right, now we need to remove the top bits and bobs so that we can add oil. My lovely assistant has already loosened the top. Easiest thing to do is hold your fork in place in the vise, but you know, properly. Okay. And you have to pull down the spring at the top and stick something in there to hold it in place. Ta-da! Now it's a simple matter of grabbing on here and grabbing on here, loosening this, and you can remove the spring. Go on then, friend. You see if you can do it one-handed. I mean one-maned. Hi-ya! Good. Very nice. Pull out that little fella. Note the way it goes in with the little gap bit at the bottom and the solid bit at the top. Now you can remove, whoopsie! Now you can remove the spring. Okay, it's time to add oil. 130 millimeters from the top of the stanchion. I'm using Motor X5 weight. It's not exactly what RaceTech wants, but it's pretty darn close. I've done a little bit of research on that and close enough. We've removed the spring out the top, and we're going to pour oil down the top of the tube and eyeball it until we think it's close to 130 millimeters from the top. And we've got this cool little syringe sucky thingy that you can measure how far down it is and then suck out the remainder. And we can get pretty accurate like that. One of the tricks is you've got to, this is the rod, which is attached to the damper, correct? No, yes. The cartridge. So it's tricky because you've got to, as you're adding oil, it's important to sort of move this up and down, the piston up and down, and let all the air bubbles and stuff come out. So that means it's best if you tie a little wire on it. And as we go, we will sort of massage, lift it up,
it's full of air, it
down.
comes out easy. And when it starts pumping in.
Yeah, when it's got air in it, you can hear it making sounds, and it also kind of is a bit jerky. And when it's totally, all the air is gone, it comes up nice and smooth. You can still hear the gurgle, 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 gurgle. That means you still got air in it. All right, this is called a suspension fork sucky thingy. You put that on and it levels it, and you pull on the syringe until no more oil comes out, like so. And then you've got 130 milliliters, or millimeters from the top. Now we will reinstall the spring, making sure not to lose the end caps. And before we put the cap back on, we're going to put in one of my 10 millimeter shims, or spacers, which is going to preload the spring just a little bit. And we've done this in the past, and we've tested it, and it is quite good. Pull the rod through. And the aluminium rod is down there. I'll hold this. Okay, this is that tricky bit where you have to pull down hard on the spring and hold it in place. Oh, don't, yeah, that's it. Okay. Now we replace the long rod that goes down the center, and this is the rod that pushes on the rebound needle so that you can do rebound adjustments from the top of the forks. And the little guy, making sure to put the split end down, goes in. Spacer, my friend, spacer. One of my nice rings. By the way, who loves it? Who loves it, huh? 2 pigs at least in the garage. There's one outside too. So I've got my spacer in there. You want to screw this cap down until it comes to a stop. You don't need to force it just till it stops.
You don't want to screw it down onto the nut. You have to have that gap and then you close it.
Right, so the nut, you should be thinking of screwing the nut up, not the, well, doesn't matter.
It's on the base.
All right, fine. And it's tight. Now, because we've got that spacer in there, it's going to be slightly more tricky to push down in, but it's really not that hard. See how the spacer fits up there nice and tight? Not really very good light in here. There, that's nice. It helps me preload just a little bit. And you screw it on. So the next thing to do is to do clickers. The top and the bottom are given to you as a starting point by RaceTech, and if I recall, the rebound is 14 from full in, it should be.
Fully closed, yeah.
So you would tighten all the way in, and then remove and loosen 14 clicks. And the bottom is? 10 from full in. All right, last little bit on installation after you got your fork back on, you got your boots back on. Many guys like to drop the triples down a little bit to make the bike corner a little bit better. And right now I'm putting it about 15 millimeters. That's what we like. So anyway, that's the last bit, and that's a bit of preference in the type of riding you're doing. Go ride! Okay, we're removing the rear shock. You have to lift up the swing arm thusly, which means you take off the seat, you loosen the bolts, you make sure you don't pull the brake line out, and you don't rip the air intake to the carb. Do it right. We're going to remove the shock, and when that's out, we'll start disassembling it and re-shimming it. Once the shock is out, you need to let the nitrogen out of the reservoir like this. We've got our shock in the vise. It's just handy to make a little mark so that you can line this valve up again, because this whole assembly is going to come out. You loosen these crown nuts all the way to the very top, which creates a ton of space, enough space to pull this absolutely precious, super important spacer collar out. And once that's out, you can remove the shock spring. Now to take the piston apart, I guess, we're gonna carefully pop the cap off of this. Little by little, bit by bit. Cap comes off. A few drops of WD-40 in here and in here. This whole assembly needs to be pushed down into the piston a bit, and this too a little, because inside there's little retaining clips, which are kind of a bugger to get out, if I recall. That's what we're up to next. Okay, very carefully, not with a whole lot of gorilla, just enough gorilla. You can push that down. We need a little bit of air out, because it's now pushing back against with air. Okay. And there's just enough, you want me to hold that down? Just enough space to get a screwdriver in there and carefully remove the retaining clip. Out comes the clip. You're supposed to make grunting noises while you do it as well, because it's not easy. It's kind of a pain. Wow, hello. Ugh. I wasn't expecting that, ladies and germs. Who was expecting that? Why is it full of gas, one asks. Did you put Mentos in my shocks? Okay, now we can remove the piston. Bloof. Yes. Set it to drain. All right, we've pushed this down, and now we're doing the same thing, prying out the retaining clip. That was easy. We need channel locks for that job, I reckon.
Yes.
Channel locks. And remove. Hopefully we're going to see a nice black bladder that doesn't have too much deformation. Oopsie.
Yeah, but
it's because it doesn't have any air in it anymore. Yeah. It's not a problem. That's all good. And that comes out. Okay, we've got the the piston with its shim stacks in a vise, and we're removing all of the little fiddly bits. And as we remove them, we set them down on a board in the order that they were removed. What's on the top there, fella?
Rebound.
Rebound stack is on the top. Below the piston and valve setup will be the compression. All right. I have had these pre-assembled or pre-ordered for me. Compression and rebound shim stacks. And all I got to do is put them on. All right, folks, so for the compression stack, the top row here is what came out of the bike, which who knows if that was original or if it was tinkered with by the previous owner. And this is the stack I'm going to be putting in. So I'll tell you that this was put together for me by Precision Concepts. This is a replacing shims that came out of a previous shock, and they kindly replicated it for me. Okay, in the rebound stack, similar to the compression stack is different, coming from Precision Concepts. These diameters are slightly bigger, and this pile of identical end shims is smaller. But I know from experience that it kicks ass. All right, there is the piston and its shim stacks all in place. You can see the little pyramid shape it makes on the top and on the bottom. Okay, now to reassemble. All right, with the assembly in upside down, we added fork oil, and I'm using this Silcoline 2.5 weight.
You put it in here, and then you do this with the hand or you blow to get the oil into the reservoir, and with that you get out the air.
Okay, so the oil goes and
the air
fills
that
up
sits
to
in
here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's no air bubbles in here, and you can keep topping
now
up.
You fill this not to the top, but nearly.
Okay. All right, now we're putting the bladder back in, lining it up with the mark we made earlier. It should, I guess, displace the oil back up to the other side or overflow.
No, it just gets out.
Okay, fine. But at least there's no air bubbles. Don't do this on the wife's carpet. So you've got to push it down below where it needs to seat so that you can fit in the retaining clip. Okay, clip is in. We'll have to grab it with the...
No, you just leave it for now.
Okay.
Or you could try to pull it up a bit.
And maybe line it up with your dot a little bit more.
There.
Okay.
Is it?
Quite. There we go. Nice. Now, with a pump, we're going to add a bit of air pressure. I don't think
30,
it has to be...
30.
Okay.
Around 30.
30 psi just to blow that bladder up again, so it'll displace the amount of oil that it is actually going to displace when it's full of nitrogen. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yep.
The same.
Good. So now we've got oil being pushed by the bladder into here and filling up to this side. Cool. We're going to stick it where the sun don't shine.
Yeah, it's filled up with oil,
Yeah, got oil right up there. Because the last thing you want is air in your shock. Okay, so we'll probably make a bit of a mess here. Plunge.
You can see it bubbling. See the air getting out.
So you're doing a little bit of up and down,
Yeah.
a little massage to force any last little air bubbles that might have gotten caught underneath the piston to come out in the valves and whatever else. Some light tapping. Basically the same sort of concept as getting the air bubbles out of your brake line. So basically you repeat this for a while, and then we push the cap back in, replace the retaining rod. The retaining clip, I mean. That's what we'll do. We proceeded to push the plunger all the way back in. As we were pushing down, I released a little bit of air from the bladder so it could go far enough down to get where the clip ring is. The clip ring slips in pretty easily. Actually, it wasn't very tricky. And now you're saying?
Now I'm going to pressurize it till this
seats.
Head seats.
Okay, so he's just adding, again, pressure with a basic bicycle pump.
That's it.
There. So now it's no longer moving.
You see?
Good.
Now before you fill nitrogen, you have to release the air.
Right. You got to clear out all the air from there.
Otherwise it's contaminated.
Last step is just to tap the cap back on. Just as we finish up.
What was I doing?
All right, replacing the spring. It is directional.
This is wider than here. So the white part goes to the top.
Yeah. And this
sits at the collar. Otherwise, if it's other way around, this will slip over the collar and break your shock.
Now, bear in mind, lots of new aftermarket springs are different. So make sure you know. But in my case, this is wider than this. So it fits the original OEM collar. But newer versions of the Eibach springs that they're selling make use of this and another color to fit. And if you don't get that other color, you're going to break your shock. Yep. Ask us how we know. So now it's a matter of just sort of finger tightening down the crown nuts again.
I wrote down what the preload was.
Oh, see, my friend. Cool. And where did you make a mark or something?
No, I measured with
the distance from the top of the threads to, or what?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So when you're done tightening this down to your pre-recorded preload level from before, we're ready to go get gas, right?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, folks. Took it down to the guys that can add nitrogen. They put in 190 psi, which is what Precision Concepts calls for. And got myself a little dust sock on it, and I'm going to reassemble. I'm not going to show you all that because it's in the manual, and by now I bet you've done it if you're watching this video. Anyway, I hope it was helpful.